Put your hands behind your back. You're under arrest." The woman looked up, shocked. In her arms were folders marked confidential, court use only. Around her neck hung an ID badge with her picture and a gold seal. But the police officer didn't seem to care. "You need to calm down, officer," she said quietly. "You're making a terrible mistake. The only mistake here is you thinking you could walk out with stolen court files." He shot back. What this officer didn't know was about to cost him everything. His job, his career, his future. Because the woman he was arresting wasn't a thief. She was a judge who would decide his fate. Before we go further, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments. And if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button right now. We share true stories about people who learn hard lessons about respect and consequences. You won't want to miss what happens next. It was a Thursday afternoon in Chicago, Illinois. The date was March 14th. Spring was trying to arrive, but the wind off Lake Michigan was still cold and mean. Inside the criminal courts building on South California Avenue, hundreds of people moved through the hallways. Lawyers in suits, families waiting for hearings, security guards watching metal detectors, court workers carrying stacks of papers. The building was huge, 17 floors of courtrooms, offices, and holding cells. It was one of the busiest court buildings in America. Every single day, thousands of cases were handled here. Robberies, assaults, traffic violations, divorces, everything you can imagine. On the 8th floor, in courtroom 802, Judge Angela Morrison had just finished her last hearing of the day. She was tired. It had been a long week. She'd listened to 12 different cases. Since Monday, she'd made tough decisions. Sent some people to jail. Let others go free. Ordered families to work out their problems. It was hard work, and she took it seriously. Judge Morrison was 39 years old. She was a black woman with kind eyes but no-nonsense attitude in court. She worked incredibly hard to become a judge. First, she went to college at Spelman, one of the best schools in the country. Then she went to law school at Northwestern University, right there in Chicago. After that, she spent 15 years as a lawyer, 8 years defending people who couldn't afford lawyers, and 7 years working as a prosecutor putting criminals in jail. She knew the law inside and out. Everyone respected her. Other judges asked her for advice. Lawyers prepared extra carefully when they had cases in her courtroom because they knew she'd catch every mistake. Police officers knew she didn't tolerate lies or rule-breaking. Judge Morrison had built her reputation on fairness. If the police did their job right, she supported them. If they cut corners or violated someone's rights, she threw out their cases. She didn't care if it made her unpopular. The law was the law. That Thursday afternoon, she changed out her black judge's robe and put on her regular clothes, dark pants, a cream-colored sweater, and comfortable shoes. She clipped her judge's ID badge to her belt. You could clearly see it, her picture, her name, the words Judge, Criminal Court, Cook County. She gathered up 6 case files she needed to review over the weekend. These were real cases involving real people. She couldn't talk about them with anyone. They were confidential, secret. Only judges and lawyers working on the cases could see them. She put the files in her arms and headed toward the elevator. She was planning to work from home tomorrow, Friday, so she could catch up on reading without interruptions. This was normal. Judges took work home all the time. She rode the elevator down to the first floor. The doors opened to the main lobby. It was busy as always. People coming and going. Security guards stationed at the exits. The click-clack of dress shoes on marble floors. Voices echoing off the high ceiling. Judge Morrison walked toward the door, ready to go home, rest her feet, and maybe order some Chinese food for dinner. That's when Officer Marcus Webb stepped in front of her. "Excuse me, ma'am." "Stop right there." Judge Morrison looked up, surprised. Officer Webb was young, only 26 years old. He'd been a Chicago police officer for just 3 years. For the past 5 months, he'd been assigned to court building security. His job was simple: watch for problems, help people find courtrooms, and keep everyone safe. But Officer Webb had a problem, a serious problem. He saw a danger where there wasn't any. especially when he looked at black people. "Can I help you, officer?" Judge Morrison asked politely. "Those files," Webb said, pointing at the folders in her arms. "Where did you get those?" "From my courtroom. I'm a judge." Webb's eyes narrowed. He didn't believe her. In his mind, judges were supposed to look a certain way. They wore robes. They sat high up behind big desks. They were usually older, usually white, usually men. This woman? She was wearing regular clothes. She looked young, and she was black. No way she's a judge, he thought. "You're a judge?" he said, his voice dripping with doubt. "Yes, Judge Angela Morrison. Courtroom 802. She shifted the files to one arm and pointed at her ID badge on her belt. "You can see my identification right here." Webb glanced at it for half a second. That could be fake. Judge Morrison felt her stomach tighten. She'd dealt with disrespect before. She was a black woman in a position of power. Some people couldn't handle that. But this was different. This was happening in her own workplace, in the building where she was a judge. "Officer," she said carefully, "I can assure you this badge is real. I work here. I've been a judge for 6 years. Now I need to leave. Not until I verify those files aren't stolen," Webb said. His hand moved his handcuffs. People around them started to notice. A lawyer Judge Morrison recognized stopped and stared. A security guard farther down the hall turned to look. Whispers started spreading. "Officer, what's your name?" Judge Morrison asked. "Officer Webb." "Officer Webb, I'm going to say this one time. I am Judge Angela Morrison. I sit in courtroom 802. These are my case files. I'm taking them home to work on over the weekend. This is completely normal and completely legal. Now step aside." But Webb didn't move. Instead, he grabbed her arm. "You're coming with me to the security office. We're going to sort this out." Judge Morrison couldn't believe it. He was actually touching her, grabbing her, treating her like a criminal. "Take your hand off me," she said, her voice rising. "You are making the biggest mistake of your life." "The only mistake is you thinking you could steal court documents," Webb replied. He pulled out his handcuffs. And that's when everything changed. A crowd had gathered now. At least 20 people stood watching as Officer Marcus Webb pulled out his handcuffs and reached for Judge Morrison's wrists. "Put your hands behind your back," Webb ordered. "Absolutely not," Judge Morrison said firmly. She held the files against her chest. "I am a sitting judge in this courthouse. You will not handcuff me." A man in an expensive suit pushed through the crowd. "Webb, what are you doing?" It was Daniel Park, one of the senior prosecutors who worked in the building. He appeared in Judge Morrison's courtroom at least twice a week. He knew exactly who she was. "Sir, stay back," Webb said. "This is police business." "Police business?" Park's voice rose in disbelief. "That's Judge Morrison. She's a judge." Webb ignored him. "Ma'am, final warning. Hand behind your back or I will use force." Judge Morrison's heart was pounding. She'd sent criminals to prison. She'd faced down violent defendants. She'd dealt with angry lawyers in difficult cases. But she'd never been treated like this. Never been disrespected like this. And certainly never in her own courthouse. "Officer Webb," she said slowly, "I want you to listen very carefully. In about 5 minutes, your supervisor is going to arrive. And when they do, you're going to realize you just arrested a Cook County judge for doing her job. Do you understand what that means for your career?" "I understand you're resisting," Webb said. He grabbed her wrist. The files fell from her arms and scattered across the marble floor. Legal documents. Confidential information. Case notes. Everything spilled everywhere. A woman gasped. Someone started recording on their phone. Daniel Park yelled, "This is insane." Webb twisted Judge Morrison's arm behind her back and slapped a handcuff on her wrist. The cold metal clicked shut. Judge Angela Morrison, a woman who'd spent 15 years studying law, who'd graduated top of her class, who'd sworn an oath to uphold justice, was being arrested in her own courthouse. "You have the right to remain silent," Webb began. "I know my rights," Judge Morrison said, her voice shaking with anger. I taught constitutional law, and right now, you're violating every single one of mine. Here's a question for you. Should police officers be required to memorize the faces of every judge before working courthouse security? Tell us what you think in the comments. What Officer Marcus Webb didn't know, what he should have known, was that Judge Morrison wasn't just any judge. She was one of the 3 judges who reviewed police misconduct cases for the entire county. When police officers broke the rules, when they used excessive force, when they violated people's rights, those cases came to her courtroom. She decided whether officers kept their badges or lost their jobs. She determined whether evidence was collected legally or had to be thrown out. And Officer Webb had just handcuffed her in front of dozens of witnesses. But here's the thing. This wasn't Webb's first problem. Not even close. In the 5 months he'd worked courthouse security, Marcus Webb had racked up 7 official complaints. 7 in 5 months. Let that sink in. Every single complaint followed the same pattern. Webb would see a black person, usually a woman, dressed casually or in business clothes. He'd demand to see their credentials. He'd question whether their ID was real. He'd accuse them of not belonging in the courthouse. Complaint number 1. He stopped a black defense attorney and insisted she couldn't be a real lawyer because she looked too young. Complaint number 2. He detained a black court reporter and demanded she prove she worked there, even after she showed him her employee badge. Complaint number 3. He followed a black social worker through the building, convinced she was up to something suspicious. Complaint number 4. He questioned a black paralegal about whether her law firm ID was legitimate. Complaints number 5, number 6, and number 7. 3 more black professionals, 3 more confrontations, 3 more accusations. Every time the complaint was filed, every time his supervisors read it, and every time they did basically nothing. Officer Webb needs additional training on professional courtesy, one report said. Officer Webb should attend a diversity seminar, another suggested. But nobody removed him from the courthouse. Nobody recognized the obvious pattern. Nobody asked the simple question, why does this officer only seem to have problems with black people? The Chicago Police Department treated each complaint as a separate incident. They never connected the dots. They never saw what was right in front of them. Officer Marcus Webb couldn't accept that black people held professional positions. In his mind, black people were suspects, not judges or lawyers or court workers. And now, that bias had led him to the worst mistake possible. Back in the courthouse lobby, Webb was finishing putting both handcuffs on Judge Morrison when a booming voice cut through the noise. Webb, release her right now. Captain Raymond Torres came running across the lobby. He was the head of courthouse security. He'd worked there for 19 years. He knew every judge by name. He knew their courtrooms, their schedules, their faces. And he knew Judge Angela Morrison very, very well. Captain, I've got a situation here. Webb started. The situation is you. Torres roared. He turned to Judge Morrison, his face full of horror. Your Honor, I'm so deeply sorry. This is completely unacceptable. He pulled out his keys and quickly unlocked the handcuffs. Judge Morrison rubbed her wrists where the metal had been. Red marks were already forming. Captain Torres, she said quietly, your officer stopped me, accused me of theft, refused to accept my judicial ID, and then handcuffed me. In my own courthouse, in front of my colleagues. Torres looked like he might be sick. I understand, Your Honor. This will be addressed immediately. Webb's face had gone pale. He was finally starting to understand. She's really a judge? Judge Angela Morrison, Torres said through gritted teeth. Criminal Court Division 8. She's been on the bench for 6 years. She presides over major felony cases, and she's one of the 3 judges who reviews police misconduct. The blood drained from Webb's face completely. Oh, no, he whispered. Oh, yes, Judge Morrison said coldly. She knelt down and started gathering her scattered files. Several people rushed to help her. Daniel Park, the prosecutor, collected papers and handed them to her. Your Honor, I witnessed everything. I'll provide a statement. So will I, said another voice. It was Judge Morrison's own court clerk, who'd come downstairs to find her. I saw the whole thing. Me too. said a woman in a business suit. "I'm an attorney. I practice in this building." This was racial profiling, plain and simple. More voices joined in. "I have it on video. I saw him grab her. He wouldn't listen when she said she was a judge." Webb stood frozen, watching his career crumble in real time. Captain Torres pulled him aside. "You're suspended, effective immediately. Turn in your badge and weapon. Security will escort you out." "But, Captain—" "Not another word. Go." Judge Morrison finished collecting her files. She stood up, straightened her sweater, and looked directly at Officer Webb. "Officer Webb," she said, her voice steady and calm, "you saw a black woman carrying files and assumed I was a criminal. You didn't see a professional. You didn't see someone who belonged here. You saw my skin color and made a decision. That decision just ended your career." Webb opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Judge Morrison turned and walked toward the exit. The crowd parted for her. Some people nodded respectfully. Others looked angry on her behalf. As she pushed through the doors into the cold Chicago afternoon, she knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. This was just the beginning. The next morning, every news station in Chicago was talking about it. Judge handcuffed in courthouse by officer. Black judge arrested while carrying her own files. Racial profiling caught on camera at criminal court's building. The video taken by the witness had gone viral. Millions of people watched Officer Webb handcuff Judge Morrison while she told him exactly who she was. They heard him refuse to believe her. They saw the files scatter across the floor. They watched a respected judge being treated like a criminal. People were furious. The Chicago Bar Association, a group of lawyers, released a statement. "This incident represents a complete failure of training and judgment. Judge Morrison deserved better." The NAACP, an organization that fights for black people's rights, demanded Officer Webb be fired immediately. Other judges spoke out too. If this can happen to Judge Morrison, a respected colleague with 6 years on the bench, what does that say about how black professionals are treated everywhere? Judge Morrison spent the weekend at home, thinking. She was angry, yes. Embarrassed, absolutely. But more than anything, she was determined. This couldn't just disappear. This couldn't be swept under the rug with an apology and some additional training for Officer Webb. Real change had to happen. On Monday morning, she called a civil rights lawyer named Patricia Williams. Williams had won major cases against police departments across the country. She knew how to fight, and she knew how to win. "I want to file a lawsuit," Judge Morrison said. "Not just for me. For every black professional who's been treated like they don't belong. For every person who's been judged by their skin color instead of their credentials." "Then let's do this right," Williams replied. 8 weeks later, the lawsuit was filed. Judge Angela Morrison versus Officer Marcus Webb, Captain Raymond Torres, and the city of Chicago. The lawsuit listed everything: false arrest and unlawful detention. Webb handcuffed a judge for doing her job. Violation of civil rights. He treated her differently because she was black. Racial profiling. His pattern of 7 complaints proved he targeted black professionals. Interference with judicial duties. Judges have legal protection from this kind of harassment. Emotional distress. Being arrested in front of colleagues caused serious humiliation and pain. Failure to supervise. The police department knew about Webb's complaints and did nothing. The lawsuit included all 7 previous complaints against Webb. It showed the pattern clearly. Black attorney questioned. Black court reporter detained. Black social worker followed. Black paralegal accused. And finally, a black judge arrested. 7 incidents. 7 black professionals. 0 consequences until now. The city's lawyers read the evidence and knew they were in serious trouble. This case couldn't go to trial. A jury would be outraged. The settlement would be enormous, and the city would lose badly. They recommended settling immediately for maximum payment. 14 months after that Thursday afternoon, in the courthouse lobby, the city of Chicago settled the lawsuit for $5.8 million. Yes, you read that right. $5.8 million. But the money wasn't the only thing Judge Morrison demanded. The settlement included major changes. 1. Mandatory training. Every officer assigned to courthouse security had to memorize the faces and names of all judges before starting work. No exceptions. Two-strike rule. Any officer who received 2 complaints about racial profiling or questioning professional credentials would be immediately removed from courthouse security. 3. Instant verification. If anyone claimed to be a judge or court employee, officers had to verify through court administration before detaining them. For Officer Marcus Webb's termination, he had to be fired permanently. 9 weeks after the incident, Officer Marcus Webb was officially terminated from the Chicago Police Department. The termination letter was clear and direct. Officer Webb handcuffed a sitting judge, refused to accept legitimate judicial identification, and demonstrated a clear pattern of racial bias against black professionals. Despite 7 complaints in 5 months, Officer Webb showed no improvement in judgment or behavior. His employment is terminated effective immediately. Webb's name was entered into a national database that tracks officers who've been fired for misconduct. His law enforcement career was over at 26 years old after just 3 years as a police officer. He never appealed the decision. He never spoke publicly again. He simply disappeared from public life. Here's a question. Should officers who handcuff judges without verifying their identity face automatic termination? Drop your answer below. 6 months after the settlement, Judge Morrison was invited to speak at a police training conference. The room was filled with officers, captains, and police chiefs from across Illinois. She stood at the podium and told her story. "I am a judge," she began. "I went to college at Spelman. I went to law school at Northwestern. I spent 8 years as a public defender helping people who couldn't afford lawyers. I spent 7 years as a prosecutor putting criminals in jail. I have tried hundreds of cases. I have been a judge for 6 years. She paused and looked around the room. And none of that mattered to Officer Webb. When he saw me carrying files in the courthouse, he didn't see a judge. He didn't see a professional. He saw a black woman, and he assumed I was a thief. The room was completely silent. I told him I was a judge. He didn't believe me. I showed him my judicial ID badge with my picture, my name, and the court seal. He said it might be fake. I offered him multiple ways to verify my identity. He refused and handcuffed me instead. Her voice grew stronger. This didn't happen on the street. This didn't happen in a store. This happened in a courthouse, my courthouse, where I work every single day. And it happened because Officer Webb, like too many officers, couldn't imagine that black women hold positions of power and authority. She leaned forward. Officer Webb had 7 complaints in 5 months. 7 times he questioned black professionals. 7 times complaints were filed. And 7 times your departments did nothing meaningful. You gave him training. You counseled him. And then you sent him right back to do it again. Her words hit hard. Here's what I need you to understand. I'm one of the judges who decides police misconduct cases. I determine whether officers violated people's rights. I decide whether evidence should be thrown out, because police didn't follow the rules. And an officer in NY Courthouse handcuffed me because he refused to believe I was a judge. She stood up straight. If this can happen to me, a judge with power and position, imagine what happens to regular black people every single day. People without badges, people without law degrees, people who don't have the ability to fight back. The story of Judge Angela Morrison and Officer Marcus Webb teaches us something important. Racial profiling doesn't just hurt ordinary people. It reaches into courthouses. It targets professionals. It disrespects judges. And when departments ignore complaint after complaint after complaint, they're not just failing. They're choosing to let it continue. Marcus Webb's career is over. That's justice. Chicago paid $5.8 million. That's accountability. The police department changed its courthouse security policies. That's reform. But the real question is, what happens next? Will departments finally remove officers after 2 complaints showing a pattern instead of waiting for 7? Will courthouse security finally require officers to actually know who the judges are? Will we finally accept that black professionals, even judges, deserve basic respect in their own workplaces? Because if we don't fix these systems, We're just waiting for the next officer to make the same assumptions, the next professional to be disrespected, the next courthouse to become the scene of humiliation. If you believe this story matters, if you think police officers should face real consequences for racial profiling, then do 3 things right now. First, hit that subscribe button. We share real stories about justice, consequences, and people learning hard lessons about respect. Second, smash that like button to help this story reach more people who need to hear it. Third, share this video. Post it. Send it to someone. Let people know that even judges aren't safe from racial profiling. And drop a comment. Do you think officers who handcuff judges should be automatically fired and banned from law enforcement forever? This isn't just about one officer or one judge. This is about whether we're going to accept a world where even the people who run our courts can't walk through their own workplaces without being treated like criminals. We're going to keep telling these stories. We're going to keep demanding change. And we're going to keep fighting for a world where your credentials matter more than your skin color. Subscribe now, because justice delayed is justice denied.